Jaconore.
Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you, pull up a chair, make yourselves comfortable. This is the stuff of legends and of epic Hollywood movies. What I have for you is a double-edged tale of heroism and daring-do, matched with an amazing story of animal loyalty and human kindness. Now, I don't know if you're the kind of person who has cockles of your heart, but rest assured, you should prepare to have them warmed. This is a true story in every important detail, and if truth be known, a few unimportant ones as well. So, it also comes with my assurance that no harm came to any animal in its unfolding or even in its telling. Unfortunately, the same can't be said of one of the human participants, but more of that later. This incident in question took place a week ago today, Tuesday, and it unfolded on a beautiful stage, that is, Cornwall. You may wonder how it came to your correspondent's attention so promptly. Is it because I have my finger on the pulse firmly of events in far-flung limits of our proud nation? Well, not exactly. Or perhaps it could be that the main character, and indeed the heroine, of the piece is a dear friend of mine, and she modestly spilled the beans to me. I say spilled, it was more of the blood out of a stone school of storytelling. But it is a great story nevertheless, and that's the way it happened. Now, back when I was in my prime, or 1990 to be more accurate, I was a police constable, and one of my colleagues was Sue. We were both part of Margaret Thatcher's thin blue line and stationed in the borough of Stockport, Greater Manchester, which was the J Division of Jim Anderton's Greater Manchester Police. It was after both Maggie and Jim took their leave of us that Sue and I also lost touch with each other, and it would be another 27 years before I actually tracked her down to beautiful Bodmin. My manhunt skills have improved since those days, but at least it gave the old adage chance to be proved that time makes the heart grow fonder. Little did I realise that during those intervening years I had made at least 6 holiday trips to Cornwall, and in all likelihood I'd come within hundreds of yards of Sue without even knowing it. Now, we are reunited. Well, I say reunited, there's a small matter of 334 miles between Stockport and Bodmin. WhatsApp is a huge blessing, long as the Stone Age Cornish Wi-Fi coverage allows it. And as you will see, that became an issue during the story as well. More important is that Sue is also a valued member of the Massage on the Sergeant's Desk on Facebook. Actually, I think she joined up to please me, as she's too much of a lady to like the below the belt kind of material I trot out. Friends, for reasons that will become clear, this sadly will be the only place that this epic tale is likely to be told. And in the time-honoured tradition of storytelling, give it your best attention and then pass it on. So, if you're sitting comfortably, then I shall begin. Our story, as I said, starts a week ago, early on Tuesday afternoon. After an abortive attempt to speak to her GP, who was apparently busy emulating his predecessor, Mr. Shipman, by injecting the octogenarian members of his practice list with some substances beyond their comprehension, Sue decided to fill the spare hour it gave her to take her daily walking, jogging constitutional along the Camel Trail, which starts near to where she lives. Now, Sue is not some kind of holiday home layabout. Far from it. She is what is euphemistically called a civil servant, and a very hard-working one at that. And it just so happened that this was one of her rare, well-earned rest days. As events would prove, it didn't land up being very restful. Now, the Camel Trail is 18 miles of walking, jogging or biking path which runs from Bodmin to Padstow. She'd walked to the start of the trail and had checked her laces to make sure they were done up properly, and off she set to the east. Without a care in the world, she took in the magnificent scenery and the lovely Cornish weather. She'd been making good progress when things were about to take a strange turn. The trail was straight and level, and as she looked about 150 yards ahead, she could see two dogs running in circles on a raised part of the trail. It was at a spot where the trail ran across an embankment, which was part of the disused Atlantic Express rail route, as it made its last few miles before arriving at its terminus in Padstow, having left all the way from London. The dogs, a commanding-looking fat old golden retriever, and his scatty Springer Spaniel partner seemed to be having unsupervised romp on the trail. As the distance closed, the retriever, who we now know is called Romeo, stopped in his tracks when he saw Sue in the distance, and in a second he turned and was in full stride towards her, along with the hapless Jules in his wake. The dogs and Sue quickly closed the gap between them, and for a moment Sue was a little bit concerned about exactly what Romeo's motives were. As it turned out, she had no cause for concern. And as Romeo reached her, he ran round in a circle and nuzzled, all excited, and he nuzzled her hand with his muzzle. She spoke calmly to the dog, but there was no calming him. After circling Sue a number of times, Romeo then ran out in front of her, back in the direction he'd come from. After about 5 yards, he stopped and looked over his shoulder, and then waited for her to move after him. Sue set off after him, as if there was some invisible lead between them. And Romeo just kept moving steadily ahead, and then occasionally checking that Sue was still following. Meanwhile, Jules, the spaniel, was dashing around aimlessly in all directions as the threesome made their progress back to where she'd first seen them. Well, it didn't take them long to get there, and when they arrived, Romeo stopped, started going round in circles and barking loudly. Sue instinctively knew what she had to do next, but for the life of her, she didn't know why. Was she really caught up in some kind of Lassie or Skippy-inspired rescue mission? Surely not. Surely not. "Hello!" she shouted at the top of her voice, and then waited for a reply. Nothing. One more fruitless shout will be sufficient, she thought to herself. But as she filled her lungs and opened her mouth, she heard a reply. I say reply, it was more of a strangled, loud groan or a distressed cry. But in customary search and rescue circles, she let out the second "hello" at the full volume. Sue received the same pitiful noise reply, but a little bit more comprehensible. "Help over here!" She could just about make it out. She went to the side of the embankment and looked down the steep and muddy slope, and she could just make out the figure of a man about 15 feet below, half embedded in some undergrowth. As she made eye contact with him, she asked the obvious question, "What happened?" The man replied in a pained voice, "I was coming down the embankment to the banking to retrieve my dog's stick, and I lost my footing and fell. I think I've broken my ankle." Sue resisted from asking him what he was doing retrieving the stick when he had a dog that was made for the purpose, but instead focused her attention on the man's right foot, which wasn't facing the right direction. She checked her phone, and predictably there was no signal to summons help in any shape or form, preferably wearing a bright logoed white uniform and in a logoed van with bright flashing lights, more than Blackpool illuminations outside the pandemic. Then she looked around. Nope, nobody on the trail as well. She was all on her own. She shouldn't have been surprised. Cornwall never been strong on the communications front. She slowly and carefully negotiated her way down the treacherous slope towards her broken dog owner. She was anxious not to join the reenactment of the dangerous sport of cheese rolling that takes place each Easter on Cooper's Hill near Cheltenham, and when there's a fleet of ambulances on standby to cart away the injured parties. She was in no hurry to add herself to the casualties. At the foot of the slope, she found Tim, who was clearly in great deal of pain. He was white a shade of pale, and in clearly no position to skip the light fandango. He was also making strange guttural noises, which bore a resemblance to a cat trying to cough up a fur ball. Oh, what to do next? Sue decided there was no way she could leave Tim at the bottom of the slope. If she went for help and Tim had lapsed into unconsciousness, any ambulance crew would have never found him away from the trail. Little did she realise what the task ahead would mean. Tim was in agony, but managed, with Sue's help, to eventually get up on a foot. Tim put his arm round Sue, and Sue grabbed his belt, and off they set. It had taken Sue less than a couple of minutes to get down the slope. Little did she realise it was going to take the best part of an hour to get back up it. They could only manage a couple of steps at a time, and then had to rest. In the meantime, Romeo was clearly fretting after his owner and kept coming down the slope and getting in the way and then returning to the trail. Sue was rather hoping that the dog would find yet another pair of useful hands on the trail, but no such luck. Hilary and Tenzing's epic assault of Everest back in 1953 could not have expended much more effort, and at least they had 4 good ankles between the two of them. With a last effort, they came over the brow and back onto the trail, and Tim was able to sit down on a trailside bench. Still, no phone signal, of course, and she had no alternative except to head up the trail and find a place with a signal. Tim gave her the keys to her car and the location and colour of his vehicle, and off she set. Oh, with the leads on the dogs. And all of a sudden she looked like a professional dog walker. Well, a lot more than she had done a couple of hours before. She made good time and found Tim's grey estate car just where he'd said. And more importantly, Sue found she had a signal. And she was more than a little grateful when she finally able to phone for some medical backup. With the paramedics en route, she turned her attention to the dogs and decided to get them into the back of Tim's car, and then she could sit and wait for the ambulance to arrive. She opened the back door to the car and urged the hounds to jump in. Then she had a new problem. Both dogs looked at her as if she was stupid. Jump in the back of the car? No. No, our dad, he always picks us up and puts us in the car. It was written across both dogs' faces. Oh, God. She then surveyed the dishevelled animals before her. They were mud splattered from head to paw and slavering from their mouths. Oh, deep joy, deep joy. She took a deep breath and scooped them up one at a time and deposited them into the vehicle in a hurry and in a flurry of mud and dog snot. And then she finally pushed the door shut and sat in the front of the car and waited for the sound of distant two-tones. It proved to be one of the shorter waits of the afternoon, and the ambulance swung into the car park near her. The two paramedics got out and she briefed them with her expert medical analysis of Tim's condition, and watched as they then loaded themselves up with all the equipment they might need. And I fancy a bit that they didn't. Well, it included at least one kitchen sink, and then off they strode, and Sue resisted the temptation to shout "good luck" or wave "goodbye," and quickly they disappeared down the trail towards their patient. Sue settled down and waited for their return. But it was going to be another 3/4 of an hour before she spotted their fluorescent jackets returning. And she could see that they also had Tim trussed up in an adult pushchair and covered him with a blanket. Not over his head, I hasten to add, but he seemed a little pale, but much better in spirit. They duly arrived at the ambulance and set about loading Tim into the back of it. She seized the moment to find out who she should call to look after his dogs and his vehicle. Now, I'm not sure that Sue knows what happened in the decision-making process, but as the ambulance eventually pulled out of the car park for the short journey to Bodmin Hospital, just down the road, she was left with the car, 2 dogs, and an address to drop them off at. Oh, God. And it turned out that the address was in fact nearly half an hour away. Nothing's ever simple. But with a simple shrug of her shoulders and another slow intake of breath, Sue and her 2 sweaty, muddy and snot-producing friends then set off on the next leg of her magical mystery tour. She eventually arrived at Tim's bungalow abode, and she offloaded Romeo and Jules. When Sue was relating the sequence of events to me the next day, I expected her to say that, well, that's the end of the story, Richard, the end of the adventure, and that she got a taxi home and got on with the relative normality of the rest of her life. But no, not Sue. Sue wasn't done yet. No, not by a long talk. She was soon heading back to Bodmin Hospital in a grey estate car, and she found that Tim had been x-rayed and assessed, was now having his ankle encased in plaster. More to the pity, it was in his head as well. Such efficiency in the NHS in Cornwall. I'm impressed. Treatment over, she assisted him back into the car and drove him home. And at last she considered that her job was done, and she was able to contact a friend who lived nearby and who could convey her home. Incredibly, the time was now 6:45 p.m. She had eaten nothing, drunk nothing since leaving her home at noon. She still hadn't managed to get the drug that she needed for her mother, and was now 3/4 of an hour late to administer her mother's medication that was due. Well, she went and did that, and it was a weary Sue who eventually got home 7.5 hours after she'd first left home. There's a moral to this tale, and that is, if you come across unattended dogs in a remote location, turn round and go home. And do it quickly. And remember, most important, don't start shouting, "Hello!" at the top of your voice. Lesson learnt, Sue. Anyway, I spoke to Sue, as I told you. I spoke to her the next morning, and she told me the whole saga. It was not easy. It was a matter of extracting it like a well-trained surgeon. If you're lucky enough to get to know Sue, then you'll know soon. Realise that she is a person to whom this sort of thing happens all too often. So it turns out that it was like water off a duck's back to her, and nothing really it was quite unremarkable. Well, it wasn't to me, and I wanted to make sure that Sue got the recognition she deserved. And the moment I got off the phone to her, I contacted the local Bodmin Bugle, or is it the Bodmin Beano? Well, they're the prize of the literary world, and in Cornwall, the local rag. Whatever its name is, they appeared very excited by the story, and especially their sports correspondent, Gerald, who answered my call. It soon became clear that the reason for that is, even in pre-pandemic Cornwall, sport was a bit thin on the ground, save for a bit of enthusiastic egg chasing, plank riding on the waves at St Ives, and of course the annual Port Isaac rowing regatta, and that was about it. After I told Gerald the basic story, as I understood it at that time, I arranged for the chief editor to ring me the following morning. That done, I rang Sue back. I broke the news of what I'd done, and I half expected her to admonish me for my breach of confidentiality. Surprisingly, she seemed quite happy with what I'd done, especially when I assured her that I hadn't given the Beano's correspondent any more information than I had to. Well, I mused. So, Sue wasn't quite the shrinking violet I thought she was. I think that penny finally dropped when she asked me who I thought would play her in a Hollywood blockbuster directed by Steven Spielberg about the occasion. What, Meryl Streep? No, perhaps not. Ollie Young, chief editor of the Beano, rang me the next day, and I regaled him with the minute enhanced version of the event. He lapped up every thrilling moment, and I took his phone number so that Sue could ring him from work the next day when she had the odd 2.5 hours to spare. So I rang Sue and told him, and then she dropped a bombshell. All bets were off. Unbeknownst to Sue and I, Tim, nice but dim, had put a cross in the "No publicity please" box. Why? I pleaded. Why? Well, it turns out that Tim had sent Sue a text thanking her for the help. And when Sue replied, telling him about the Beano's involvement, he told her in no uncertain terms that he wanted no press publicity. The reason was that at the time of the accident, he should have been at home working, as he'd been furloughed from a newly acquired job, and he was worried about his new employees and what they would think about his dog walking expedition. After consideration, I decided that was a pretty spineless attitude, but Sue, being the nice, thoughtful person that she is, was not in a mind to rock the boat. So that's where the story ends. Oh No, 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 there's more, there's more. Lonely Tim, unable to take his dogs for their accustomed walks, spotted a potential sucker for a hard luck story. So he sent Sue a series of pleading texts, and in them he tried to enlist her in some dog-walking duties. And you won't believe the next bit, but he even had the nerve to ask her, could she also include his neighbour's dog in the itinerary, as she was having difficulty getting out with her dog for walks. Sue bit the bullet and sent him a final text. She wished him a speedy recovery, apologised for being too busy to help on the canine exercise front, and wished him every happiness for the rest of his life. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's my story. It is told. I hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you every happiness in the rest of your lives. Bye-bye.